right, hello and welcome back to the Basic Bible Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Thompson, and sitting next to me here in our mobile studio is the one and only Pastor Reverend Ray Jewell.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I think it's good to be back, but if you're going to call me Reverend, I'm not coming back.
Is that all it takes?
That's all it takes.
That's all I had to do from day one?
I mean, God is the only reverend one, and I'll reserve that title for him.
All right, well, we are following up our trip to Madison. In fact, we are on the way home. We are in the car, and we are on the way home from Madison. So last week we aired our episode with Matt Sande. Matt is the legislative director at Pro-Life Wisconsin, and so we were there at the Pro-Life March for Life in Madison, Wisconsin, the second annual, and so it was a pretty interesting experience.
Yeah. So you want to share some of your interaction with the other side?
Yes. So I'm gonna air some little clips here. So this first clip I'm gonna play. We have a new name for the podcast.
Oh yeah.
It's the Dead Baby Podcast. So we came and we arrived a little early because that's what Ray and I do. But there was a huge amount of protesters. And I want to post the pictures, but I can't post all of the pictures.
Yeah.
Because some of these women that were protesting were topless. I don't know why they needed to do that to get across their message, but nevertheless, there it was. And they were loud and screaming. And so so Ray was sitting down because, he's old and tired. But I ventured into the protesters, the sea of protesters. Maybe I can get some interaction. So I had one interaction, and let me play the clip here.
Call me, hey. You look like a dishwasher too, Mr. Basic, what is it? Basic Baby Podcast. So you have babies at your house? You have dead babies at your house? You're trying to say? You're saying that you have dead babies at your house. That's what it says on your hat. You have a podcast of dead babies at your house. Again. You look like a dishwasher, and you smell like a goat, a disgusting, trashy goat. Pro-life is a lie. You don't care if people die. You do not care about women. You're not pro-life.
Yeah, so we are the Dead Baby Podcast, apparently.
Which makes no sense.
That's what he said my hat said, which says Basic Bible Podcast.
Yeah, Dead Baby Podcast.
This guy
Explain to me how pro-life people could have anything to do with dead babies.
Well, I know they think we're killing women.
Well, yeah, but that's not dead babies.
Right? Yeah, I don't know what that. I mean, the guy wasn't.
He wasn't very coherent.
Yeah, but he had a megaphone, and this was one of the cleaner things he had to say. A lot of it was too vulgar for us to air without an explicit label, and I don't want to have an explicit label on the podcast. So there was that guy, and then here are a couple of the chants that we heard. So there was a sea of protesters. Now, there were more of us than them, I believe.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's maybe 60 protesters, and there's probably
a couple hundred,
200, 300. Pastors, we're good at
inflating numbers,
knowing how crowds are.
It's like Donald Trump in the inauguration. Anyway, but so here are a couple of the chants that we had.
Keep your rosaries off our ovaries! Keep your rosaries off our ovaries! Our choice! Whose body? Our body! Whose choice? Our choice! Whose body? Our body! Whose choice? Our choice! Racist, sexist, anti-gay! Christian fascists, go away! Racist, sexist, anti-gay! Christian fascists, go away!
So, yeah, it was quite the spectacle. It was quite an interesting crowd.
Yeah.
I'd say mostly Catholic.
Mostly.
Or at least predominantly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was obvious they were there in force with,
statues of Mary.
Priests and statues of Mary and some Knights Templar.
Yep.
But it was good. And the Catholics, I've always applauded the Catholics for being in the forefront of the pro-life movement from the very beginning.
Right. And this has been I mean, back in the 70s, from what I'm told, I wasn't alive much in the 70s, but
you weren't there yet.
The Baptists kind of said, this is a Catholic issue. We don't deal with this. This isn't.
Yeah.
The Southern Baptist Convention, as I recall, put out a resolution saying this is not something we take a stance on.
Well, and it's not surprising when you have that disconnect between the physical and the spiritual.
Yeah.
And that goes against the biblical grain of Jesus caring for the whole person.
Yeah.
And he doesn't dichotomize people.
Right. So,
yay for the Catholics. I'm pro-life.
It's interesting. The first time I came to your church to hear you preach, you were quoting the Pope. You were quoting Pope Francis. So I wanted to get up and walk out just to show my protest, but I didn't. Anyway.
He says some good things. I mean, he does some really stupid things, I admit, but so don't we all.
Okay, so what were your general thoughts on the march?
I thought it was very well organized.
Yeah.
Had great speakers, and most of them were women.
Right.
They did have a congressman speak, and that I thought was good, especially at the Capitol.
Let me pause on that for a second, because I tried to get him on the podcast.
Yeah.
I tried to hijack him. So at one point, I abandoned Ray. I just left him.
That's because Ray needed to just sit.
And I walked up to the stage area. And behind the stage area. And I'm thinking, I'm the podcaster here, and I want to get some behind the scenes. I want to talk to maybe some of the speakers or something. And Congressman Grothman is one of the guys I want to talk about. Glenn Grothman from northern Wisconsin. I can't remember exactly where.
Yeah.
But he's a solidly pro-life guy. He's a Catholic as well, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But solidly pro-life on this issue. And he came, and so I heard him speak, and so I was waiting till after he spoke when he got back to kind of grab him, maybe get a sound bite for the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the guy, being a good politician, didn't come back up to the stage. He went down and mingled among the crowd, among the people.
Right.
So what a loser.
I thought maybe he snubbed you because he'd heard of your podcast.
Yeah. But we did get a lot of free advertising. I wore my Basic Bible Podcast hat.
Yeah.
I got to get you one.
You do. I'm surprised. I haven't gotten one yet. But anyway, that's fine.
Yeah, but I got a lot of comments. Oh, Basic Bible. Like, yep. Tune in.
That's me.
So thank you to anyone who's listening because of that.
Yeah.
So I imagine that we're going to be one of the top 10 podcasts in Wisconsin right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe Rock County.
Yeah, I don't even think Rock County. I don't even think Beloit.
Anyhow.
Not even my house. Anyway,
yeah,
that's another
the thing about it, they had women sharing their stories, their experience. One that was forced to have an abortion when she was 16. Right. That was pretty powerful. The mom was 7 kids, and now a single mom with 7 kids and 4 grandbabies. That was powerful. The leader of the one campus group.
Yep.
And her statement was a surprise to me. She said the majority of the pro-life movement now are young women, and that's fascinating, and it's fantastic that that's the case, because they are realizing that they've been fed a bunch of lies. I can't, I don't want to water that statement down at all.
Yeah. So yeah, I was impressed by the speakers. And I was impressed by the crowd. There was a good, healthy crowd there.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I went to a protest like this in Madison, it was a traditional marriage rally. This was, it was probably 12 years ago now.
Okay.
And we were there. It was a weekday on a summer. And, we were swarmed by protesters. Like, there were lots more of them than us.
Oh, really?
And they marched up from UW, up State Street to where we were. And you could see the throng as they approached and enveloped us. And it was maybe a little nervous a couple of times there.
Yeah.
But today, this crowd was a lot more loud and boisterous. boisterous, these protesters. But for the most part, they stuck to their place. Except there was one guy. I don't know if you saw him. I don't know if I can talk about it on the podcast, but there was, I'll just say, a female reproductive organ. Someone dressed up as a female reproductive organ up there.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, well, I saw them, and then it was clear the police kind of asked them, I think, to leave, and so they were right up on the stage area.
Oh yeah, and there was a good police presence.
Yes,
and I mean, I think that had, I don't know, because the pro-life group were not falling for a debate.
Yeah.
I think that the protesters wanted to get into an argument about the views and make it ugly.
Right. And some of them tried to. The pro-choice people did.
Yeah.
There was a little Mason-Dixon line, so to speak. There was a boundary.
Yeah.
And I was right in the middle because I was taking pictures of both sides because that's what I do. And they were shouting, screaming. The other guy, and they had. The pro-life crowd was not shouting and screaming, but they were chanting.
Yeah.
But they had their pro-life stuff, and all of a sudden, some people from the pro-choice side jumped over the and this barrier was not an actual barrier. There's no actual boundary there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all public
sort of
property.
like the Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah. And so they came up and they were blocking the signs of the pro-lifers. And the pro-lifers never did that to the pro-choice people.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them were rude. They were purposely offensive. Vulgar, and I would say pro-choice people, there are better people to represent your view, and there are better ways to represent your view.
Wouldn't you say that probably the majority of the protesters were college students?
Yes. Yeah. I noticed some elderly women there.
Yeah.
But I'd say mostly college people. And maybe that's why they're letting off some steam. And I get this is a very personal and polarizing issue.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't have civil discourse. And these guys were not about that at all.
No.
Unfortunately. So, and you could hear some of that. I couldn't air some of the stuff that we had heard. It just, I don't want to explicitly on the podcast.
Yeah.
And then last week we aired our interview with Dan Sande. Dan Sande is the legislative director at Pro-Life Wisconsin. And so I'm interested to hear what you have to say, because I disagreed with some of what he said last week.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious as to what you think, Ray, of what Dan had to say.
Well, I don't know that I want to be as strong. I mean, abortion for absolutely no reason.
Right.
I'm assuming that's what you mean.
Yeah.
But I do think that the pro-choice people have ridden the health of the mother issue way beyond what it should be taken. You know, way beyond what really is a health issue.
Mm-hmm.
Even so far as to say the emotional health of the mother. Well, obviously they've not seen people, how they've suffered after they've had an abortion.
Right, that's not what a lot of people talk about. You're not going to hear that from the pro-choice.
Oh, no. That's for sure. That's about all I had to say about it. You must, since you brought it up,
I brought it up, yeah.
Some stuff to say.
So, personally, I would make exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. In a legislative manner.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I would encourage people I know, to, if they have been raped or find themselves in that situation, I would encourage them on a personal level to have the child.
Yeah.
I get nervous when it comes to a flat-out legislative ban across the table. That doesn't take some consideration for some of the health issues that rape can involve, mental health issues, things like that. I don't like one-size-fits-all solutions to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And And so I don't know that I would push for a straight abortion ban. But I understand why people do. And I love their heart for it, and I get it. And I understand that, and I'm very sympathetic to it. I kind of waver on that sometimes. So maybe, Matt said God doesn't make mistakes. And I agree with that. I just get nervous when we handle it on a legislative level. Like, I have known young women who have been raped and have had their children and are blessed because of it.
Yep.
And I think the world is blessed because of it. When it comes to life of the mother, my own mother, when I was conceived, the doctors urged my mother to have an abortion because her last pregnancy before me ended in miscarriage. Her first pregnancy resulted in a child with severe mental handicaps, my brother, and they couldn't guarantee her life, that she would even survive another pregnancy because her body was strong enough for that. Obviously, she had it. She had the child, and here I am today.
Yep.
And so
nothing wrong with you mentally. Well, at least most of the time.
I'm still a Calvinist, right? But and so I would urge mothers I know to, there's nothing greater than a mother's love for her child, and I don't know a mother that wouldn't sacrifice everything for their child. And I think that even starts pre-birth.
Yeah.
So,
and another part of this issue, the comments on some of the signs of the pro-abortion people.
Yeah.
Is that pro-life people, not pro-life, don't care about the mothers. Nothing can be further from the truth.
Right.
I want to be sensitive to someone who's had an abortion.
Yeah.
Where that will determine sometimes, like on a pro-life Sunday, or doing something from the pulpit, celebrating the Roe v. Wade decision, turning that over, because when they had that abortion, it was a legal thing for them to do.
Yeah.
And I don't want to upset people. I don't want to turn them off to coming and hearing about Christ.
And God forgives, and God has mercy, and God has grace.
And abortion is no greater or no less a sin than any other sin that's out there.
Yeah.
And I'll be, not this week, but next week, I'll be preaching on the woman caught in adultery. Because love does not keep a record of wrongs, is the phrase from 1 Corinthians 13 I'll be touching on. And these guys who brought this woman, it's a trumped-up charge.
Yeah.
And according to the law, the guy should have been there too.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me one bit. It was one of the guys that was in the crowd.
Right.
And it wouldn't surprise me one bit that he raped that woman.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if that's how that came down. And yet, the person who has the only person that has the right to keep records of wrongs is forgiving this woman.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing statement of the love of God, the love of Jesus, to anybody who's gone through this abortion, had an abortion or had some other kind of sin, whether it's homosexuality or something else that we murder, or something that we consider to be big sins.
Right.
And yet, Jesus is pretty clear that what we consider to be small sins, like gossip or greed or overeating or whatever, those are the acceptable sins.
Right.
And Jesus doesn't treat sin that way.
And those are the acceptable sins because I do them.
Well, right, and not just I, but my culture, which is the church, does.
Right.
The gossip and the gluttony, those two especially. But I don't know. I think that the love of God is bigger than any of us can really imagine.
Yep.
And we need to rest in that, and we should allow other people to rest in that. People people who have committed sins that are worse than ours, at least in our own minds.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem. We're supposed to take the plank out of our own eye before we try to take the speck out of our brother's eye.
Right.
And that just sort of reminds me that who am I to judge anybody?
Yeah.
Except for the grace of God, I'd be lost too.
Yep. Amen to that. So, so I mean, I would make those exceptions.
Yeah.
But on a personal level, urge the women in that situation to. But to go ahead and have that child, having been in that situation myself,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad my mother chose life.
Right.
But I don't know if I want to make a blanket legal.
Right.
But here's the thing, that's not where the issue is. And there are many women who are saying, in fact, the women who were there chanting, the protesters today, were talking about how we kill women, and that's what they're talking about. They're talking about some of these exceptions, where endoscopic pregnancies and things like that, fetal abnormalities and things, and some of this can actually kill the mom. And I don't know of a pro-life person. I mean, again, Dan Sande last week, he's as pro-life as you get. He said, no, when the life of the mother's in danger, in situations like that, we don't consider that to be abortion.
Yeah.
Or, removing a child that's already died is not an abortion.
Right.
And so, I don't know
Well, take this exit.
people who actually want. I think it's a lie of the left.
Yeah.
That we're just looking to kill women and we just don't even care. Like, no, that's not where we're at.
Well, what was killing women were the illegal abortions, doing them in the back street corners with wire hangers or whatever they used to do it.
Yeah.
Before it was quote unquote legal.
And so that's where it's like, oh, we're gonna go back to the back alley abortions. Well, are women gonna die? Well, if they choose to disobey the law and they do such grotesque things as that, maybe they will, but that's not on us. You're assuming that women have to kill their children, and that's just not true.
Right.
In most cases, and even when you have rape, incest, and life of the mother, those exceptions take, as much as I've read, are less than 1%, account for less than 1% of abortions that are performed.
Yeah, one of the interesting things Dan is it?
Yeah.
Brought up was all the doctors that are listed as pro-life on this particular website that he gave. I think that we can have a negative view of doctors sometimes because we just think they're in it for the money, and that's why they do abortions. Well, not every doctor does that.
Yep.
In fact, the majority of doctors, they stick true to their oath that they took.
Hippocratic oath.
Do no harm. And that is, maybe pastors and churches should take that oath this way.
All right, Ray's giving me directions here, so if I'm never heard from again, that's why.
Yeah, Ray knows this way.
I will say that, yes, you know your way around Janesville, far better than I do.
I grew up here, and this is the way we used to go north. I used to go to school up at Rochester, and
they had school back then.
Yeah.
History class, did you just look out the window and write stuff down?
Janesville's sure changed, though. It's gotten bigger for one thing, but everything commercial is out on this side of town, the northeast side. And it's always been that way. It's just a lot more of it than it used to be. I mean, the old Walmart, that used to be a drive-in movie theater when I was younger.
All right, so
that's where Annette and I went on our first date. Was that drive-in?
Did they have movies with sound, or was it just
sound and G-rated?
Wow.
She would only go to G-rated movies, so we went and saw Swiss Family Robinson.
Oh wow!
And Herbie the Love Bug.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And you paid $0.25 for it?
Yeah. Right.
All right, so we're gonna wrap this episode up.
1982. You were alive by then, right?
I was alive in 1982. Yes.
Well, actually, it was 81 when we went on our first date.
I was still alive.
We just celebrated 40 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm surprised she lasted that long.
I know. I think we're all surprised that she was able to endure all of that.
Endure me, yeah.
All right. So, any final thoughts, Ray?
God is the giver of life. And we as his people should do everything we can to help women who find themselves in a situation that they are considering taking life, to help them understand the consequences of that for her health and mental state later on in life, but just to also see that this fetus is a baby, as one of the things they were saying to us as we were leaving.
Yeah, and I tried to engage on that.
Yes,
but,
you did.
But it's hard to engage with naked yelling people. And I tried. She had the megaphone in my face practically. But I was trying to ask her, what does a fetus mean? Well, you know what the word fetus means.
Yeah.
And the word fetus in Latin means little baby.
Right.
So, yeah, okay, continue. Go. Sorry, I'm
No, you're fine. So to reach out in love, to reach out, certainly don't use the weapons of the other side, the anger, I've known people who justify bombing abortion clinics and killing abortionists because they're saving life.
Yeah.
That's not the way of Christ. You don't kill life to save life.
Right.
I mean, even war is a difficult thing.
Right.
But it's about peace. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace.
Right.
And he brings joy and he brings love. And we are to allow him to live through us in such a way that is what we are exhibiting. I mean, we could be the only Jesus people see.
Yeah.
And if we're, getting hot under the collar and yelling at the opponent, that's just not a very Christ-like way of doing it.
Right. And we do, we want to stress that we love both mom and baby.
Right.
And it's not loving to kill your children.
Right.
I get that there might, if this is the case of self-defense and the mother's life is in danger, then, you make the decision that you think is best. But, in most cases, that's not what's happening.
Yep.
And so, despite, what we heard, the hatred, I recognize not everybody on the pro-choice side is that way.
Right.
And I think we can have some civil conversation about that, and I would encourage that. And so, but I would say that, yes, God is the giver of life. And, yeah, and I'm not ashamed. I'm not ashamed to say my pro-life view is absolutely rooted in my faith.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to deny that. I'm not going to try to separate the two and just go through purely
Well, and why would you want
thing.
to?
Right.
There's no need to.
No.
I mean, if we are going to be consistent to the Christian faith, we live the way we do, and we think the way we think, and we act the way we act because of who Jesus is.
Right. And I believe God's truth is God's truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't believe in a division between secular and
right.
sacred.
Exactly.
I believe God's word applies to all people, even if you don't accept that.
Oh yeah, all right.
But that's another podcast probably, because I know some people who would hate that very idea. Yeah. But anyway, we got to wrap this up.
We do.
Recommended resources. I'm going to recommend a book on abortion by R.C. Sproul that you can actually get free online. I'll have links to that as well. At least Ligonier used to give it free. If not, you can buy it for a really cheap price off of Amazon. So I'll have that link on the podcast. So join us back next week on the Basic Bible Podcast. So check us out, www.basicbiblepodcast.org, or check us out on Facebook, the Facebook group, and then on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Biblecast. So until next week, have a good rest of your week.